From Athens. Well, the political and financial turbulence in Greece has shaped discussion at the G20 summit, which is now just wrapped up in Cannes. EU leaders voiced strong determination to defend the euro and agreed on bolstering the International Monetary Fund's resources. We can now cross live to RT's Anissa Nawe with all the details. And hi, Anissa. So what's the latest from where you are?
Well, the ever-changing Greek tragedy took center stage at this year's G20, with host Nicolas Sarkozy wrapping up the summit by saying once again that he is determined to protect the single currency to the end. France and Germany believed to have put a lot of pressure on the Greek prime minister to cancel a referendum that essentially would have let the Greek people decide what track to take in terms of the euro crisis. Well, to discuss that further, we can now cross live to Washington, D.C., where I'm joined by financial blogger Dimitri Kofinis. Thank you for being with us. How much pressure do you think was put on the Greek PM by Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy on those talks, the emergency talks they held on the very eve of this summit, in which he left, and then, of course, that referendum was cancelled?
Right. Well, they were certainly dissatisfied about it. I think that the Prime Minister has received pressure pretty much from all sides. He received pressure from Merkel, from Sarkozy, from the leaders in Europe, but also from members of his own party, as well as the coalition, of course. He was reprimanded across the board. So I think that the referendum that he proposed was quickly shot down by everyone.
And also, Sarkozy mentioned several times over the past 2 days at the G20 here that Greece needs to play by the rules. He said it almost at every press conference he gave. He gave a lot of them, also saying that Greece is an independent country, that he doesn't want to get involved in the internal affairs of the sovereign state. But isn't that exactly what we're seeing happening here with all the monitoring and all the conditions that are being put out for Greece?
Right. Greece is no longer an independent country. It hasn't been for a while. And if you listen to the speeches given by all the different leaders of the political parties in Parliament last night and preceding days and months, you'll see that the conversation is always on what we need to do to satisfy our creditors' demands. And our creditors are the people who are going to determine whether we survive or don't survive. So they don't hide the fact that they're not in control of their own destiny, and that they depend on the Eurozone and these bailout packages to continue to fund the government, and even more importantly, the support of the European system of central banks and the ECB to continue to provide liquidity to the Greek banking system, which has been bleeding deposits for months and months. And so that's the biggest concern of all, the fact that the banking system is no longer sustainable because it holds so much Greek sovereign debt. And if a default were to occur, the banking system in Greece would suffer as well. And right now it depends on the ECB and on the Eurozone to survive.
Speaking about everyone playing by the rules, Sarkozy also talked about those who don't follow the rules. He was speaking, of course, about surplus and deficit should have to pay sanctions. But how would France feel about paying sanctions? Aren't they themselves running a budget deficit?
Right, they're running a budget deficit above and beyond what the rules of Maastricht provide for. So if they were to pay sanctions, it depends on how they present it to their people. But the real irony with that is that the French banks are so desperate for some sort of a bailout, and if they didn't get one for Greece, for example, they could potentially go under, and France would be on the hook for a much larger amount of money. So in France's opinion, it's in their interest to do whatever they can to prevent any sort of write-downs for sovereign debt, and specifically Greek debt, but sovereign debt across the board, because ultimately the bailout that the French government would have to provide to its own banks would be such that it would blow out their deficits above and beyond what they are right now.
Now, just briefly, how do you think and what do you think would have happened if that referendum actually went to a vote? What would the Greek people have said?
I think the person who expressed best what the Greek people potentially would have said was the opposition leader Samaras in Parliament, when he said that when you pose a referendum to the Greek people under such conditions of duress and indignity, what you're going to get is an answer not to the question, but to the person who's posing the question. In other words, the people would say no to whatever the question was because they would be voting in response to what they deem to be a vacuum of leadership and democracy in the country. So I think that if there were to be a vote, that vote would have been an exit from the Eurozone. And that's what scared the politicians in Greece so much. And it's why you saw such a backlash against Papandreou when he came out with the proposition, not just from the opposition leaders, but from members of his own party, including his own deputy, who came back from Cannes the next day and immediately issued a statement saying that referendum on EU membership was a no-go, and that we need to be in part of the EU because it's backstopping our banks.
All right, financial blogger Dimitri Kafinas joining me live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for your thoughts. The G20 wrapping up here in Cannes. No breakthrough, I think it's fair to say. One of the steps that has been taken is that it seems the BRICS countries, the emerging economies, are having more of their say. They are pledging some money to the Eurozone crisis. Not clear exactly what the sum is, but a hint we're getting that really they are making some headway. The G20 summit, for the first time ever in 2013, will be held in a BRIC nation, in Russia's Moscow, in 2013. So some progress on that front.
All right. RTC News Sanawi there live for us at the wrap-up of the G20 summit in Cannes, France. Thank you.